making it more affordable, accessible, and introducing new capabilities to meet the challenges of the future. Over the past 35 years, Tory has developed and fielded dozens of critical defense and space launch systems that form the backbone of America's national security and our efforts in space exploration. He has a deep history of missile defense, strategic deterrence, and space launch. Tory is also an expert in many rocketry and hypersonic technologies and holds several related patents. He is a tireless advocate for the industry, sharing his passion for space technology and his vision for self-sustaining human presence beyond Earth. Tory is also a strong communicator in space, and his social media presence is legendary worldwide and is an inspiration to many. So, Tory, with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Rob. That was very kind. Well, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Kristen Fisher. She is the Space and Defense Correspondent at CNN. We are all familiar with her work. She covers everything from NASA and the newly created Space Force to commercial space companies and the advent of space tourism. And we have seen her work over the last 5 years also at Fox, where she was a White House correspondent and was involved with all of these new and exciting things in space. But I'll share with you something you may not know, and that is that she has a deep personal and lifelong association with space and our world. Kristen is the daughter of 2 astronauts, and so she's been involved in space from day one. And I think some of you probably know a few astronauts, and you appreciate that they tend to be overachievers. And so it isn't a surprise either that Kristen is known as a consummate professional in this industry. We are all familiar with her reporting. We trust her. She is trusted by our government. She's been on not less than 2 top secret trips with the President of the United States to Afghanistan, and we rely on her reporting, and it is just a great pleasure to have her with us today. So welcome, Kristen.
Thank you so much for the very kind introduction. I'm thrilled to be here.
All right, well, now I get to introduce General Nina Armagno, and it is a rare honor and privilege to do so. You know, Nina's current assignment is as the Director of Staff at the United States Space Force Headquarters. In this role, Nina synchronizes policy, plans, positions, procedures, and cross-functional issues across the entire Space Force. And in sort of plain English, I'll say what that really means is she makes that headquarters staff work as an integrated and well-oiled team. And considering their span of control and their mission, that is quite an accomplishment. I think many of you probably know that General Armagno is also the first woman general officer commissioned in the Space Force, but I'll bet that some of you don't know that she is also the first and only person to have commanded both space launch wings, meaning that she really has a deep expertise in that area. And in fact, Nina has served our country for more than 30 years in the United States Air Force. It has pretty much all been involved in space. She knows how to design requirements, how to procure and operate systems, and even how to integrate our space capability into other missions, things like our strategic deterrent. And so there are few people who know more about space than General Armagno. And I will tell you personally that she is a brilliant officer and a truly gifted leader. And I am humbled to be here and to be able to introduce you. Welcome, General Armagno.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure being here to reflect on the 2nd anniversary of the United States Space Force. I'd like to thank the Washington Space Business Roundtable, the organizers, sponsors, for having me today, and thank you, Tory, for that amazing introduction. I'm humbled. So the Space Force's year 2 anniversary, what we're calling the 2nd birthday, is just 5 days away on December 20th. And as is typical of birthdays, I'd like to spend a little bit of time reflecting on this past year, how we've been delivering our capabilities to the Joint Force, to the American people, and to our allies and partners. But before I focus on year 2 of the Space Force, I'd like to take a brief look back at our creation and highlight some notable year 1 accomplishments. With the signature of the FY20 National Defense Authorization Act on December 20th, 2019, we became the 6th branch of the armed forces and the first new U.S. military service created in over 70 years. The historic legislation was passed with bicameral and bipartisan support. Defense experts and lawmakers alike had talked about creating a branch of military dedicated to space. They've been talking about this for decades, but to be frank, even on the night of December 20th, we were all still a bit surprised by President Trump signing that National Defense Authorization Act that included the establishment of the Space Force. You see, there was a team of people in the Pentagon planning for the potential establishment, but they thought they'd have years to stand up the service. Instead, they had months and even days in some cases. So since pen was put to paper that evening, the pace around here has been frenetic. So I'd just like to talk about a few year one accomplishments before we get to year two. And one of the first things we did was to publish our inaugural doctrine, our first independent doctrine document for the Space Force. And we did this within 180 days of our establishment. This document articulated space power with a distinct form, as a distinct form of national power. What I love about this doctrine is that it was created by a group of airmen who are now Guardians. There are about 20 of them. And this is an entirely grassroots effort. It wasn't part of their jobs. It wasn't part of a school assignment. They saw a gap and a need, and they came together to write this remarkable document. And the way it was developed, I think, this grassroots kind of groundswell of understanding there was a need and then just moving out and making it happen, I think that that's emblematic of our service culture. So we are designed as a lean and agile service with a purpose-built headquarters here in the Pentagon and only 4 deputy chiefs of space operations here, a streamlined field construct where we collapsed 5 echelons of command following an Air Force model down to 3 echelons of command. This shortens the distance between the tactical experts in the field and our strategic leaders here in the headquarters. We built the first ever separate budget last year in year 1 for the Space Force. This consolidated about $17.4 billion of existing Department of the Air Force resources and moved it over to the Space Force. And as a reminder, this only accounts for 2.5% of DoD's total budget allocation. Well, the White House released its fiscal 22 budget last spring, and it remains to be seen what will be appropriated by Congress. We hope for that any day now, and we have our fingers crossed. But what I'm most proud of is that during all of this activity of organizing and standing up, our missions never skipped a beat. We did all of this with executing the mission to 100% of our capability. For example, if you'll remember back in January 2020, we provided exquisite missile warning to Americans when Iran attacked the Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, where American personnel were stationed. And as a result of our early warning, they were able to take cover and no American fatalities existed. So if year 1 was about inventing the force, then year 2 was about putting it into action by integrating it across the DoD, the interagency, industry, and our allies and partners to fully leverage what we had built. It's clear to me that the United States Space Force delivers. We've continued to have tremendous accomplishments throughout 2021, and I'll highlight some of them here in terms of people, our organization, teamwork, and once again, mission accomplishment. So people are our most precious asset, and the Space Force has revamped our personnel process to recruit, retrain, retain, and promote the best of the best. Last year, we released a forward-looking human capital strategy called the Guardian Ideal, allowing us to build a more highly trained, educated, and developed warfighting force while taking care of Guardians and their families throughout their entire careers. Initially, the Space Force was made up of new acquisitions and voluntary transfers from the Air Force. But just last July, speaking of people, we began welcoming transfers from the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. We had 650 slots to fill and approximately 4,000 service member applications. That's a selection rate of less than 17%, allowing us to handpick the best of the best and only the top applicants. We also launched a university partnership program this past year with 11 universities, beginning with the University of North Dakota. What this program does is enables world-class research, advanced education, and leadership development for us to be able to recruit, educate, and develop a competent, diverse, and inclusive workforce. I personally had the pleasure of traveling to Atlanta on behalf of the Space Force as part of the Georgia Tech University Partnership Program signing, and I couldn't be more excited about the future of our partnership together, not only with Georgia Tech, but all 11 of our partner universities. Lastly, we held the very first ever Women in Space Symposium this past fall. It was completely virtual, kind of like this event, and I was honored to be its champion. The symposium brought together over 900 participants from over 5 different countries. And, you know, much like a forum like this, I had no idea how many participants there were because you could kind of only see what you can see here in a WebEx or a Zoom or one of these forums. But when we did the final count, there were over 900 participants. We had really candid discussions about the experiences of women in the Space Force and how we can shape our culture to enable diversity, equity, and inclusion. We also continued to mature our organization through year 2. We did a lot of the initial inventing in year 1 of our organization and designing the headquarters staff. But in January of this past year, the Space Force was designated the 18th member of the intelligence community. This aligns us with other members of the Defense Intelligence Enterprise. We also stood up the last 2 of our 3 field commands, Space Training and Readiness Command, and also Space Systems Command. These commands are built for developing combat-ready space forces and acquiring and sustaining lethal and resilient space capabilities. In another milestone, we stood up the Space Warfighting Analysis Center, or SWAC, as you may hear us calling it. SWAC looks across all aspects of the DoD space enterprise, and they are informed by comprehensive intelligence and analysis. They're charged to come up with cost-effective force design solutions that meet DoD and national security space requirements. So the Space Force is leading the way with DoD partners to deliver game-changing capabilities, also in a cost-effective manner. We work together to streamline space governance. We did this by creating a single council for space capability development. We're calling this the Program Integration Council, or PIC. And one of their early results, the national security space launch prices have been cut by over 50% by preserving commercial-like pricing for commercial-like launches. A huge accomplishment. Teamwork. The Space Force doesn't go it alone. We deliver to our joint force, our allies and partners, and the American people through teamwork. We've spent year 2 expanding cooperation to enhance prosperity and security with our allies and partners and with industry. You know, space is an inherently global domain, and leading in space provides the opportunity to enhance strategic stability and global alliances. Just like the other services, we have built partnerships that expand our total capability and allow us to stand together against malign actors in space. For example, just to show you how far we've come, 2 years ago, we brought 12 partner nations together for the military, 12 partner nations sent their military service chiefs to the International Space Symposium, where General Raymond and General Goldfein hosted a Chiefs Summit. We held our first summit on space during that same engagement. This past August, Chief Raymond attracted space chiefs from 22 different countries from every continent except Antarctica. Other nations are looking to Space Force for an exemplar of how to generate real effective space capabilities that meet our national security requirements. Our partnering arrangements have delivered cost savings for the U.S. taxpayer and opportunities to grow our relationships with the international community. For example, Norway is hosting a Space Force payload on one of its satellite launches, and it's providing Arctic communications 2 years sooner than we could do it, and $900 million cheaper than we could do it if we had to procure our own launch and the integration costs and launch costs for 2 satellites. Our partners in industry are essential to our success as well. And today, commercial companies are leading the way in innovation. They're daring to think big about what's possible in space. We launched SpaceWorks in year 2 to tap into that innovation. And during the marquee event of SpaceWorks, kind of akin to AFWorks, we conducted Space Pitch Day. This year, we selected 19 startups and small businesses that each will receive a $1.7 million contract in small business innovation and research phase 2. Public-private partnerships are absolutely crucial to advancing space technology, reaching innovative companies that we couldn't normally reach, and defending America's military interests in space. SpaceWorks and Space Pitch Day are both part of driving that effort. Further on the acquisition front, we're taking a new approach with our industry partners. Just this past October, the Space Warfighting Analysis Center, or SWAC, conducted its first business fair, a strategic level event where they shared their force design concepts, their models, and their threat intelligence with industry. This event was conducted at a highly classified level, but now our nation's space industrial base, which is the best in the world, has information earlier than normal, more information than normal. And doing this partnership early makes a lot of sense to us. We're confident that this approach will bring the solutions our nation needs much faster than the traditional years-long requirements, development, and acquisition cycles. It will also give space acquisition professionals insight into industry's efforts much earlier. So together, it's a win-win, and we can definitely deliver for the American people and our nation. Just like we did in year 1, the Space Force completed all of this, and actually these were just a few examples of what we've been doing. We've done all this without skipping a beat in terms of mission execution. We've completed 47 successful launches in 2021, and in one groundbreaking event, Space Systems Command launched our very first tactical responsive launch mission last June, which compressed a normal multi-month preparation timeline to just under 3 weeks and demonstrated a possible rapid reconstitution capability for the nation. Which, after all, launching rapidly is great, but to what end? To the end of reconstitution should a very bad day in space happen and the country need to recover. So the Space Force capitalized on advances in reusability as well. And we capitalized on America's vibrant commercial launch community. We launched the first national security space system on a previously flown rocket booster for part of our GPS constellation of satellites. This added up to about 30 million in savings over the course of the whole process. So the Space Force clearly delivers, and we're putting space capabilities in the hands of our warfighters faster and more cost effectively than ever before. So after nearly 2 years, I can confidently say the Space Force is more relevant than ever to our nation's safety, security, and prosperity. The Space Force was created in recognition that space is now a warfighting domain, and we're seeing strategic competition play out in space before our very eyes. Despite nearly 7 decades, though, of human exploration and activity, rules governing conduct in space remain a work in progress. We're on the precipice of a dramatic increase in the volume and diversity of commercial space traffic. This dramatic increase must be accompanied by order rather than chaos to ensure that safety, stability, and sustainability that we just talked about. Moving forward, the Space Force has the opportunity to lead with American values, to establish the trust and the relationships necessary to create norms of responsible behavior in space. And I have no doubt that our Guardians will continue our legacy of mission excellence throughout year 3. We cannot afford to lose space because the space capabilities of the United States Space Force underpin our way of life and our way of war. As I look toward year 3, my mission each day will be to drive the Space Force to keep delivering new capabilities at operationally relevant speeds, keep delivering on our commitment to promote norms of responsible behavior in space, and most imperatively, keep delivering space power to the Joint Force. Thank you, Washington Space Business Roundtable, for having me today. Happy birthday, Space Force, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Lieutenant General, thank you so much for your remarks, and it's just an honor to be able to chat here with you today as we talk about everything that has happened with the Space Force over the last 2 years. And so first of all, happy birthday almost to the Space Force, just 5 days away or so. I'd like to start by asking you about the public's perception of the Space Force. When it was first established, I remember hearing General Raymond go out, and it felt like almost all of his interviews were simply about explaining what the Space Force is, what it does, why it's necessary. There was a TV show made about the force. There were jokes made about it in the White House briefing room. As we enter year 3, do you feel as though the Space Force, that the public finally really knows what the Space Force is, what it does, and why it's important? Or are you still in that explanatory phase?
Kristen, thank you for that question. I mean, I certainly remember those days when we were seriously at work here in the Pentagon and across the entire force, actually having conducted space operations for our nation for decades already. You know, for decades, we've been providing exquisite capability from space, not only for the Joint Force and our joint warfighting partners, but also for the American people in terms of GPS and weather and, you know, other communications and other types of exquisite data that comes free, you know, to the world. And so, you know, at first I think it was a little, it was just kind of a little tough to, you know, try to realize, you know, wow, the American people actually think we're a joke. Thank you, Netflix. You know, so of course I watched Netflix to gain as much information as I could learn about why it was so funny, and it was funny, by the way. So I think we decided to, and we learned very early, we just had to keep educating and keep talking about the Space Force, what it really provides, what it's been, you know, what space operations has been providing for decades, and where we're going in the future and why it's so important. And so almost every one of my briefings and interactions and interviews had started with the threat, talking about Russia and China and their capabilities, what they were working on and why, to counter the United States capabilities in space. I honestly think we're making some headway, and maybe it's not all us. Maybe our pacing competitors are doing it for us. There's a lot of strategic competition in space. I think Americans are seeing it, and while I think we do still have educating to do and you know, talking and exchanging, we definitely want to bring Americans into the public discourse about space and the threats we're seeing and why the Space Force exists. I think that we still have a little bit of work to do, but it's not, I don't think we are the subject of the jokes from year one. So I think we're making some pretty good progress.
I think that's a very safe and fair assessment. Well, let's talk about these pacing threats that you bring up, because it really has been a pretty wild few months for folks that cover space, and of course for everybody in the Space Force and Space Command. You have China testing this hypersonic glide vehicle. You have Russia conducting what everybody agrees was a very egregious and irresponsible ASAT, anti-satellite weapons test. Do you think it's safe to say that the U.S. is now officially in a race, a space race with China?
We don't characterize it as a space race. And the way I look at it is, we're not trying to match the capabilities that we see Russia and China developing. We're not trying to build a system for system. It's not going to be 1v1, because in the space domain, you can respond militarily from other warfighting domains like air and land and even sea and undersea. You can respond to threats in space using other national levers of power, like diplomatic and economic. So it's not a race in my mind, what Russia and China are doing, and they've been observing us for years. They see how space has really enabled our joint force to be the best in the world at what we do. And they're very simply trying to counter the entire joint force, trying to get at us through the space domain. They're trying to deter us by developing capabilities in the space domain that can interfere with the exquisite information and data and systems that we provide to the joint force and to the American people.
And so on the issue of hypersonics in particular, I believe it was General Hyten back in October who talked about the fact that it was China that had performed hundreds of tests of hypersonic weapons over the last 5 years, while the U.S. had only performed 9. And he really attributed this to this kind of fear of failure that's embedded within the DoD and the defense industry. And so I'm curious what you think could be done to make it acceptable for companies as they try to test out this cutting edge technology. What more needs to be done? What can Congress do? What can the Pentagon do to make failure acceptable in order to keep up with the Chinese, specifically on hypersonics?
I think it's almost a simple word, and that is support. The program needs support. It needs support in terms of resources. It needs support in terms of the talent that is, the A team that needs to be brought to bear. It really is almost like anything else that our nation has ever done. If we put our minds to it, if we focus on it, if we put the right people in place and the program is sufficiently resourced, it will succeed. General Hyten also talks about the late 1950s and early 1960s, when we were developing ballistic missiles, and our missile program in the United States was first developing. There were failures, many failures, but that program was a priority for the nation. It was resourced. We had the best minds in the business working on the program, and there was an understanding that failure was not failure with a capital F, But failure is simply a learning step in the process to get a capability that can ultimately deliver every time you need it.
And so do you think something needs to be done perhaps at the congressional level to make it so that you don't have to have all these hearings and conversations after a failure? Is there something more that could be done on the congressional side of things? And I ask this because we're going to get into Congress's criticism of the Space Force momentarily. So I wanted to give you a chance to kind of perhaps gently criticize them.
Well, I'm not going to do that from where I stand here in my office because hypersonics is not it's not my mission area. It's not a Space Force mission. But like I said before, it's an example of a program looking for support. And when you talk about resourcing, that's always Congress. That's always Congress, the authorizers and the appropriators, bicameral and bipartisan, supporting a program that they decide is important for the nation.
When you look back at, one of the key reasons that was made for why a Space Force was needed, it was to speed up this acquisitions and procurement process. And at the Reagan National Defense Forum, Congressman Cooper talked extensively about how, and this is obviously somebody who was a champion of the Space Force from the very early days, but he continues to be quite critical of the force in terms of speeding up the acquisitions and procurements process. He just says it's simply not going fast enough. And so what specifically do you think is impeding that process, and how do you think the Space Force can go faster in year 3?
The Space Force is part of the military, the Department of Defense, and we are subject to DoD 5000, which is the instruction that governs acquisition of all systems, weapon systems, of anything the department would like to acquire. So there's a lengthy process. If you've worked in it for a while, like Secretary Kendall has, he knows that the process can be tailored, which means you don't necessarily have to take every step that would, make us take years and years to develop something. He realizes that we can take more tailored steps to get decisions made in terms of acquisition and getting programs in the hands of warfighters at speed. But what I've realized, and I did work in acquisition for a little while, not as an acquirer myself, not with the authority of an acquirer or the education for that matter, but I've seen the whole process from requirements and capability development through acquisition, through procurement, to operationally field test, and then make systems operational. There's nothing about this process that you can snap your fingers and blink away. These processes were put in place for a reason. And I think it's up to the Space Force to ask for authorities to go faster, which we're doing. But it touches everything. It touches the DoD structure. It touches the Office of Management and Budget, which has authorities over acquisition in terms of resourcing. It touches Congress, who's willing or not willing to give more authorities to a new service. Really, what we're talking about is almost a whole of government approach that needs to be brought to bear to allow the Space Force to go faster. Now, we're doing some steps on our own, things that we can do ourselves. I mentioned the PIC that we stood up, which is a group of acquirers from SWAC, from SSC, and others, the National Space Defense Center, that come together and decide what to move out on quickly, what's ready to go. They decide our priorities, which is another important part of this, to have your priorities clear, authorities put in place, and the funding, the resourcing, and the ability to move out quickly. We're getting the Space Defense Agency within the Space Force this year. Dr. Derek Tournier is going to join us, and legislation has put it in place that he's going to join us this coming year, we hope. And what he's doing is trying to work, I call it cracking commercial, hacking commercial, basically trying to figure out what commercial companies, how they can move so quickly, trying to capitalize on some of their innovation and inventiveness and bring it into the hands of operational warfighters sooner. So we have a lot of things in work, and I think our friends in Congress do understand how complicated everything is. We have enjoyed some pretty good support from them as well.
One other thing that you mentioned during your remarks that the Space Force has done recently is that SWAC business fair, the Space Warfighting and Analysis Center's business fair. And I talked to so many folks in industry who said that this was just truly, groundbreaking and revolutionary to be brought in this early on, and that amount of classified data and models, threat models shared with them. They were so happy and pleased about it that they didn't want to leak anything to me out of fear that they would upset the Space Force. So I'm given that response from industry. Do you think that this is something that the Space Force is going to be doing more of?
Yes.
Holding more types of these business fairs? Can industry expect that in year 3?
Definitely, I think so. I've also heard the resounding happiness, support for what we've done. We've definitely tried over the years to bring industry in early. I remember when several years ago, when we had a space vision of the future, and it was conceived of, built, and developed at a highly classified level. Well, we ensured that we could share that with industry, but one and done is not what's necessary. What's necessary is early and often, which you saw Mr. Andrew Cox do when SWAC shared his force design architecture, his models, and sharing the intelligence at such a level that industry understood exactly what we need and why we need it. So I think absolutely this is a recipe for success, and we're going to repeat it.
I'm sure folks in industry will be very, very pleased to hear that. You talked a little bit about the need for rules and norms in space, and I think this became particularly apparent after Russia's recent ASAT test. It's been so long since those have been updated, and you describe it as a work in progress. Do you have any, I guess, what is your level of hope that we can actually see some real progress made on that front, establishing clear rules and norms in space in year 3?
I think it's absolutely possible. Now, it's not a Space Force role or responsibility to develop these norms.
Right.
We are working with OSD, we're working with the State Department, and international partners, of course. These have to be international norms of behavior. Secretary Austin gave us 5 norms of behavior for DoD space, to follow, and those are very straightforward and certainly achievable. But what will make a real difference for the space domain is that norms, maybe not necessarily the DoD norms, but norms of behavior are implemented from a space use perspective. It's better for safety, for sustainability of the space domain, and for exploration, for science. But from a military perspective, what's important about norms of behavior is that we're going to be able to tell who's not following them. We'll be able to identify bad actors more quickly, and I think more easily. When the norms are put in place, you can easily see who's operating outside of those norms.
Oh, I have one more question for you, and then I do want to open it up to everybody that's watching, because we are getting some good questions coming in. But you know, it's become very clear this year to the public. I know it was very obvious to everybody who's in the force and folks who cover this closely, just how great a threat China is in space. But General David Thompson recently said that China could overtake the United States to become the #1 power by the end of the decade. And I'm curious if you agree with his assessment.
I think what General Thompson was talking about is the pace that we see China moving out on developing their own space capabilities and systems to counter our capabilities. So I think what he was doing was just addressing the speed that he saw. We've been talking about the threats for years now. We've been talking about their ability to hold our systems at risk in the space domain. Not today, but it's going to be in the near future. And actually, in my mind, one of the positives of Russia and China developing so quickly, especially China developing so quickly, to me, that means they're going to be more dependent on space just as we are. And so they're not going to want to destroy the very domain that they need to operate in and that they're going to be used to operating in. So we certainly welcome the competition in space. We don't want that competition to turn into anything that would be, that would generate conflict. I think we need to communicate more with the Chinese and the Russians, for that matter. We don't want any missteps or miscalculations in the space domain, that's for sure.
I think that's such an interesting way to think of it. The more that they are invested in space, the less likely they'll want to do something like what perhaps the Russians just did. Okay, Lieutenant General, I would like to open this up to a few questions. So first up, let me just pull up my chat here. Why don't we start with Brendan Curry? Brendan, would you like to pop open your mic and your camera and ask Lieutenant General Armagno a question?
Well, thank you, Kristen. General, thank you so much for being with us and taking your time. I'm with an organization called the Planetary Society, and my boss is Bill Nye, and we're primarily focused on civil space exploration, but he's been asking me in the Washington arena to see where there are opportunities between the civilian space exploration community and what our friends at Space Force are doing, because there seems to be at times shared workforce, shared industrial base, and there may be ways to harmonize efforts in a compatible manner to address all our mission goals when appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan, for the question. Please tell Bill Nye hello for me. He visited Cape Canaveral when we were in the middle of a countdown, and he came into the cab there, which is where the Launch Decision Authority and my team reside for launch. And it was just a thrill for us to have him visit us, check out where we were in the countdown, ask whatever questions, and it was a thrill for our airmen at the time when we were in the Air Force to meet the science guy. So please give him my best. We are definitely partnering with NASA. We see the partnership between military and civil just as you do. There's opportunities to harmonize, opportunities to work together on similar challenges. It's the same domain after all, and we have to work as an enterprise. So we signed an MOA this year with NASA. We're working on things, issues such as space traffic management and all the activity in space, how to better understand it, categorize it, how to better keep track of everything from debris to other nations, satellites and systems. And there's a lot of opportunity actually beyond Earth's bounds. I know NASA is interested, of course, going back to the moon and doing interplanetary research and travel. And the Space Force is interested in going beyond the Earth bounds in the future. That may not be something you see in year 3, but in the future, looking at that cislunar space as a potential for increased space domain awareness as the cislunar space becomes more economic and more used by civil, commercial companies and other nations. So thank you for the question.
Since you were talking about space traffic management there, I want to go to Marcia Smith because she has a question precisely on that topic. Marcia, do you want to pop open your mic and video, please?
I'll keep my video off if you don't mind. I have a broadband problem here.
Sure, go for it.
So I don't want to ruin everything. But I was just wondering, General, how Space Force feels about the pace at which the shift is taking place for space situational awareness and space traffic management from DoD to the Department of Commerce. It seems to have fallen on the back burner in the Biden administration. And are you wishing that they would accelerate that, or are you pretty content with the pace?
I think we all need to be demanding customers, and certainly us in the military, our mantra is to go fast. Our mantra in the Space Force is to go fast, and I think the American people should be demanding customers as well. So we're not, necessarily satisfied with the pace. Understanding there are a lot of things to consider and work out when you're taking an entire mission area from one government entity to another. Certainly, that's understandable. But the faster this can happen, the faster that the Space Force can take Guardians who were and are to this day working on kind of cataloging the objects they see in space. The faster we can move out on transferring that mission, the faster we can take those Guardians and put them into more warfighting roles, protecting, defending our nation's satellites and space-based capabilities. So the faster we can move out, the faster the Space Force can do the mission it was designed to do.
We've got a few more minutes left, so I'd like to ask you just one final question before we turn it back over. During your remarks, you said that year 1 was all about inventing the force. Year 2 was about putting it into action, integrating with the Department of Defense. And year 3, you said you hope to keep delivering. I'm curious, if you come back here, if we're both invited back here next year to do this chat for the 3rd birthday of the Space Force, what are some of those things that you really hope that you'll be able to say that the Space Force was able to deliver on in year 3?
I think you'll see, and I hope I am able to say that in year 3, you'll see us really putting our tires on the track and just really moving out and delivering the things that we've been thinking about and working on and designing. So you'll see the results of some more force design work. The missile warning and missile tracking force design is nearly complete. You'll see that unveiled publicly in year 3, and we'll continue to evaluate force designs for other missions. You will see continued standing up of the service. Right here in the headquarters, we have about 300 people, and that's less than half of what we need to be a full functioning headquarters here in the Pentagon. We're going to stay lean, agile, and mission focused, but we need more than 300 people to do it on the headquarters staff. So you'll see us grow in terms, not necessarily in terms of volume, but in terms of capability. We are bringing Army, Navy, and Marine Corps members into the force, and we're bringing some of those systems, space systems, into the force as well. You'll see that success in year 3, and I know that you'll see continued mission excellence from the guardians of your United States Space Force.
Well, Lieutenant General, thank you so much. I believe our time is up, so I'm going to hand it back to Betsy, I believe.
Thank you.
Actually, you're handing it back to me, Kristen, but thank you.
There you go.
Unfortunately, we're out of time for today. I'd like to thank everyone for joining today's event, and in particular, Lieutenant General Armagno for her thoughtful remarks. Thank you also to Tori Bruno for his introduction and to Kristen Fisher for moderating.